So good afternoon, everybody. I want to review AEW Dynamite for yesterday, and what I want to mention is that last week I was not able to review it because I was traveling to Columbus, Ohio, and and also too, I have to also mention that I try to work all the hours that I can, and the most you can work at my job is 130 hours a pay cycle. So that means like some Wednesdays I have to pick up overtime. So that means like next Wednesday, I have to work overtime because I'm going to World's End in Chicago. And the other thing too is that I'm not sure if I'm going to continue reviewing Dynamite or Collision. I should because I do care about AEW, but the problem with it is two things: that I have a very busy personal life. I work a lot of overtime. I live with a relative with mental health issues. So it's almost like if I'm reviewing Dynamite or whatever, he's going to be like yelling at me to like, help him clean the kitchen, or he's going to be yelling at me to keep it down because it's usually at night, or he's just always going to be rude or inconsiderate. And then also, I got to just know how to sleep between working between 64 to 80 hours a week. I work at a hospital where I have, a manager that, after I work like, maybe 88 hours, 96 hours, 104 hours, he's going to be like paging me to stay over on top of all that crap, which is fucking bullshit. Somebody works 14 hours and they look like they have scoliosis and they're limping and hobbling. You're going to tell them to stay over after all that shit. That's something like that. But I do feel that there may be a point where I'm like, you know what, I can't put in the quality that I want to. And there's people like Wrestle Toddy and other channels where they really improve and get better and better. But if I can't keep the quality up, why should I keep continuing with this? But overall, I think with my experience with AEW, I do still enjoy it, despite that the company has ups and downs, really. And what I will have to say is that this was a show where the wrestling was strong, but the weaknesses were strong with AEW. That ultimately the biggest problem that they've had is that they have no build towards World's End. There's no matches announced. We know that there's going to be 3 matches on the card, which is the semifinals, the Continental Classic, Blue League, Gold League, and the finals. So that's all we know. But we don't know, like, maybe the other, like, maybe 9 or 10 matches that they're going to have. And it's frustrating because usually when they throw together pay-per-views, that's just kind of like cheap. You want to see a good build. You want to have an emotional investment, and you don't get that. But tonight, the matches were excellent. I actually kind of regret, once again, not going to Atlanta, Georgia when I could have made that happen. So the first match of the night, it was the first match of the night was the Babes of Wrath versus the Babes of Wrath versus Tony Storm and Mina Shirakawa. So when I was watching this match, it looked like they missed a few spots, and some people are saying too that you look at Harley Cameron, she's a little bit green, but she's also very like dedicated and she really cares about what she's doing. And I also am happy that she won because earlier this year, Harley Cameron talked about wanting to beat Mercedes and wanting to win a title and wanting to like represent her country. So in a way, this is almost kind of like her journey coming to a closure. So this is like long-term storytelling. But also, the other thing that I liked about it is that you saw Mina Shirakawa and Tony Storm in the ring while they were talking, and they kind of looked a little angry. So you can kind of see that there could be a heel turn, but also you kind of could see maybe a weakness of Tony Storm, which is that she has ego issues. Whether or not, you saw it earlier this year where Mariah May had the evil ego. Maybe Tony Storm has a bit of an evil ego as well, really. So I think you're teasing a Tony Storm heel turn. But the other thing is too that they have to kind of make sure with the women's tag team tournament that they have a bunch of heel factions, really. So you have some conflict because you have to kind of make sure that this does not turn into an Okada title or a Mercedes Moné title where it's just sitting on their shoulder for a very, very long time. Like, you don't see Mercedes talk about the 13 people the 13 rivalries she has with people facing for her 13 titles, or the international championship or unified championship. There's really nobody who's gone after that except Kenny Omega, really. So it doesn't really make sense. So you don't want to do that. You have to kind of make sure that with these titles you have like people who want to go after that and want to start shit with them, So I think maybe teasing a Tony Storm heel turn was actually really good, but I also appreciate that this was about the celebration of the Babes of Wrath. Because Will has done a lot for the company, so has Harley Cameron. But the point of it is that sometimes you don't want to turn into a Hulk Hogan, hot dogging and grandstanding. Oh yeah, trying to steal somebody's moment. Oh yeah. And you didn't see that with Tony Storm and Mia Shirakawa. You kind of saw Tony Storm as a former champion being like, "Hey, you know what? Congratulations, really." And I appreciate that. It wasn't. Even though they had them in the final shot, really, they're trying to tease a heel turn, but you weren't doing a Hulk Hogan hot dogging and grandstand and taking their moment, really. So I appreciate this. It was a good opening to have something like this. But again, I felt very frustrated because this should have been at World's End. And then the next match you had, if I remember correctly, was that you had Okada versus Jack Perry, and they went on a very long time. It was a really good match with a lot of spots and near falls and chaos and craziness. And Jack Perry, was kind of like that high flyer. There was a controversial spot where Jack Perry bites Okada in the dick, and I really just did not like that. Because again, this becomes very 48-hour film project, which means it's a competition where people make a movie in a weekend, and a lot of the winners are usually comedy films. It's like Potpourri and America's Funniest Home Videos. So this felt like, why are you throwing this comedy shit in? And I don't like that because sometimes with AEW, they have to understand that if you're having a serious competitive match, and maybe the story of Jack Perry is he wants to get some licks on the Don Callis family, Kyle Fletcher, Okada, Takeshita, because they've been harassing him and the elite. It doesn't make sense that he'd bite someone in the dick, really. So it just doesn't go. It's unnecessary. It's stupid. It's pretentious. So, but it was ultimately a really, really great match. Otherwise than that, it shows that Jack Perry can be a single star. It shows that, Okada can have great matches with people. And it kind of says, too, that, hey, when you look at the content of the Classic, there are a bunch of dream matches in this. That are really, really great, really. They did a couple of backstage promos. You did a promo with Eddie Kingston, and he did talk about how he's excited for the match tonight, how Terry Funk, this is the anniversary of Terry Funk winning the NWA Championship 50 years ago. So I like that, he's talking about his role model, and, he's talking, just about, being part of the company and just really wanting to make something of himself. So I do appreciate that. There was another promo where, between Daniel Garcia and Mark Briscoe, and I give them a lot of brownie points because Mark Briscoe does a lot of backstage promos. This time he was in the ring, and I've always said this, that Mark Briscoe is the voice of an angel, really. He has a lot of charismatic, he talks crazy, so it's ultimately like, why do you have this guy in backstage promos? He needs to be in the ring, he needs to kind of be talking more. The TNT Championship usually has a lot of defenses, so he needs to be talking in the ring, spitting the hot fire, really, because he's a really great mouth person. So he was in the ring, he was talking crazy, and then Daniel Garcia, I think it was Wheeler Yuta or Daniel Garcia, says something like, something about how he has, something about his teeth, really, and something about how little teeth he had, and he probably has more teeth than he probably has more kids than he has more teeth, or something like that. So that was definitely very witty, and I give them credit for that, really. But also too, obviously they're douchebags, so obviously that kind of worked, really. And Daniel Garcia, even though and Wheeler Yuta, even though there's a lot of people who don't like them and think that they're kind of what's the word? That they're kind of useless, or they just fill up space, really. I think that when they want to deliver and they want to get people upset, they are getting over as heel heats because, a lot of people just don't believe in them because they see them as kind of like cronies, really. So I do think that they're getting the right type of heel heat. So that's nothing too bad with that. So next week they're going to say in Cardiff, Wales, it's going to be Daniel Garcia versus Mark Briscoe. And again, this kind of goes with the problem, really, where, okay, what about World's End? That's 2 weeks from now, and you're setting up a bunch of matches for Winter's Coming Part 2, which is in Wales. So what about World's End? What about people like me who are going to spend their Christmas weekend going to Chicago and, and paying money for all that stuff, and paying money. Oh, well, we get no match. We know we're going to get 3 matches, but we don't know the other 8 or 9 matches that we're going to get yet. That's not good. The other thing that they had was like the Sisters of Sin and Jamie Hayter and Chris Statlander. It looks like they're gonna have a match on Collision, and they also announced that Collision's gonna be at 4:30 because obviously they're gonna be in Cardiff, Wales, but also too they have the John Cena retirement, so they don't want to like they want to kind of prevent a show versus show type of thing. So again, women being pushed. A lot of people complain about that. That there's not a lot of women's matches. So yes, it's good that they're setting something else up. The next thing is that they did talk to Mercedes, I believe. So Mercedes is definitely, very pissed off that she lost her title to Red Velvet, one of her titles to Red Velvet. So I think we're trying to set up Mercedes versus Chris Statlander one more time, or they might be setting up a TBS Championship defense. I think that they should do Statlander versus Mercedes one more time. Last bitch standing, and then last champion standing, and then what happens is that if Statlander wins, she'll take the TBS Championship, and then she'll say something like, "Hey, I don't want to be a double champion. I'm not gonna be like Mercedes, and I'm just gonna like put this towards a tournament, but Mercedes can't participate in that tournament." Like they could do something like that. Like I think that they can do one more match where the goal this year is Mercedes to become the AEW Women's Championship, and she wants like one more chance, and they're gonna do a last man standing match. Like I think that makes a lot of sense, but I don't know if they're gonna do that. And then the next match that they had, and this was like the worst match on the card on the show, and you'll be surprised with the Tornado Tag Team between Swerve Strickland, Hangman Adam Page, and Powerhouse Hobbs and Shibata. And the reason why it was one of the worst match is, before I forget, I did not like that spot where Hobbs was just like standing there, and it looked very telegraphed when Swerve and Hangman went out of the ring and they put him through a announce table. Like honestly, it made Hobbs look very like stupid in a way, because he should have just kind of like knew that was going to happen. Really, it's like he stood there and took it. Really, so it's almost like how they choreographed that made Hobbs look really stupid. The next thing about that was that they started it as like a street fight where they were fighting in the crowd, they were fighting in the audience, they were fighting at catering, and then they brought everybody to the ring, and then they said something like a tornado tag team match is a tornado tag team match is two wrestlers can fight each other at the same time. You don't have to tag a person in, so it's basically and it's basically a 2-on-2 throughout the match, but you can't use weapons. So the problem is that you kind of confused everybody, because sometimes when tornado tag team matches, and they do a lot of this in AEW, where they do a lot of fighting outside the ring, and then they say, hey, it's actually supposed to be no weapons, no like chaos, no like going out there. So you kind of confused everybody when you did that. And then the other thing too is that they've had many tornado tag team matches where people use hardcore stuff, where you had like somebody through a table, really. So when you do all that crap, you kind of confuse the audience, really. So I felt like a little confused. It's like saying, hey, why are you not you went from not enforcing rules, everybody taking their time doing crazy crap, and then you went back to enforcing rules. So sometimes you confuse your audience a little bit. And sometimes in professional wrestling, like WWE does this right, where if you have a match that's supposed to happen, and if people are fighting and causing chaos before the match gets thrown out, really. And AEW doesn't do that. But the problem is that when you don't do that, it confuses everybody, because it's like saying, why are we having a match? You did all this hardcore stuff. Now you have a stipulation. The stipulation's not that well explained, so I walk away a little confused, really. So I felt a little confused when they went from hardcore and off the wall stuff to actually having a match, and then part of the match that threw Hobbs through a table, really. So this is kind of like so this kind of confused me. But also, too, this is kind of like with the Pure Championship. Like, I hate the Pure Championship in Ring of Honor, where there's stipulations to that, but they never explain to you the stipulations. Like, when you have matches with stipulations, you shouldn't even have graphics and whatever. Or if you want to do something convoluted, like just have a chaos before a match, where it is kind of where there's special stipulations, so you should kind of explain the special stipulations more clearly. But they really didn't do that much. And they have to have graphics or other things like that. Like, for example, when they did Jon Moxley defending his IWGP Championship, they said something like in Japan, it's a 20 count. So they didn't explain that to the audience or have a graphic. So a lot of people got confused, really. So they have to start being more clear with these things. Or as I said, they could have just easily said, they canceled the match. They had chaos. They got security. That could have been the ending instead of just, oh, well, we're going to just go into a regular match and do all that crap, really. The next match of the night was Kyle Fletcher versus Speedball Mike Bailey. And I was like a little mad with this match. Like, it was a really great match. It went for a long time. It really felt like a pay-per-view level match, but I did not like that Mike Bailey won for two reasons. That Mike Bailey is a smaller guy, really, so I don't feel like, it was kind of believable. And Kyle Fletcher has been doing a lot of really great things, really. I really think that this would be equivalent to LA Knight beating Braun Breaker right before Braun Breaker is challenging CM Punk for the world title. This would be like if you had Braun Breaker, I don't know, like if Braun Breaker got pinned by R-Truth or something like that, or if Braun Breaker got pinned by Leon Slater or somebody in the TNA X division, or if you had Eric Young be the jokey kind of character, and when you wanted to do a TNA versus WWE match at John Cena's retirement, and then you had a Showtime Eric Young, like that joke character, or Shark Boy pin, or a smaller person like Amazing Red pin Braun Breaker. That's kind of how I felt. I felt like Mike Bailey was kind of out of his league, really out of Kyle Fletcher's league, and I also felt another thing about this that Kyle Fletcher is kind of like one of those wrestlers like Takeshita, where he's kind of on that cusp of becoming, he's kind of almost like that upper wrestler, where he is that person that if you're going to have a pay-per-view and having the main event, you know that you're going to sell tickets. You know that's going to be a draw, really. So I think that having him lose is not good. But I also know the Continental Classic, one bad thing about the Continental Classic is that they're not going to have people get like 12 or 15 points, meaning that, like they're going to do something where everybody takes a loss. Everybody gets a car with Oprah, everybody takes a loss at some point. So I don't like that because then it becomes predictable. And then it also becomes a situation where, everybody's going to get a zero somewhere. And I felt like, Kyle Fletcher should have not been in that situation. But also, too, that Mike Bailey has not really done a lot in AEW. He's not had a lot of singles matches. Like, Jet Speed has lost a lot of tag team matches. So I felt like this ultimately did damage. I felt like ultimately that this was a bad look for Kyle Fletcher, but most people are going to forget about this. This did not bury Kyle Fletcher, but it was just, not good usage of a pinfall. The main event was Samoa Joe versus Eddie Kingston. And what I have to say about this is that, it just wasn't right. It was just a match. Nothing stood out to me. But the one thing that I'm proud of is that Eddie Kingston won clean. Eddie Kingston lost clean. And because a lot of times you're going to see a TNA wrestling type of thing where you're going to see Hook and Shibata and Hobbs and the Dojo guys all interfere and do other crap like that. And it was kind of like a one-on-one match. And I actually like this a lot because this happens a lot, like with Roman Reigns, like when he was the tribal chief for 3 years. Or this happens a lot in TNA wrestling where there's a lot of times where you have the final boss, but there's a lot of cheating and everything like that. And Joe is a big badass wrestler, and he needs to stand out as, whatever anybody faces me, it's one-on-one shit. It's because I'm not a pussy, really. So I really think that how it was and people interfering and other shit like that works for Samoa Joe. So I'm really happy with that. But as I said before, and I will say it again, that there's really no matches announced for World's End. And that's kind of a detriment, really, because honestly, there's no excuse for that. They've done this for many, many years, which is that World's End doesn't get any matches until the last minute because they're so busy with Winter is Coming. You might even have to, and maybe in my opinion, get rid of World's End, make the pay-per-view Winter is Coming, and then you're off to the races. Or you need to understand that when you have special shows, you have to do something like say, okay, this is going to happen at this show, but also on the same show, let's lead to something else, really. So people feel like, oh, well, you're not trying to rush towards pay-per-view matches. Like, honestly, like the Don Callis family should have, and the Don Callis family and the Young Bucks, they all should have just said, hey, you know what? The match we're going to have is not going to be a card of whales. And then there's also the other issue, too, where a lot of matches like that, Don Callis family versus First Jurassic Express and Kenny Omega. That should have happened on World's End, really. So again, like a lot of their time matches or their like like the matches that they're going to have later on get put on other shows, really. So again, I'm very critical of this because honestly, your pay per views are where they make a lot of money. A lot of people put a lot of eyes on their pay per views and everything's like that, really. So usually. It's that thing too of they're really not respecting their pay per views by having all these special shows or saying, hey, one's got to lead into all these shows got to lead into some matches, or every single week we should be adding 2 or 3 matches and stuff like that. So I really just don't feel that I feel AEW really lacks in that, and they're not ever going to get better. So this is kind of like the issue with AEW, where they don't build to their pay per views. They don't build to their pay per views professionally all the time, but a majority of the time they're more focused on special shows. And then they're more focused on special shows and stacking special shows. And then when they have pay per views, they just rush job a lot of stories. Really, that's they've done that for a very long time, and I don't think they're going to change when they should change that. And make sure that pay per views have really compelling shit. Because remember, like last year when they had Swerve versus Hangman and Hangman burning down Swerve's house, that got a lot of pay per view buys. And ultimately, with a show that was like a pay per view that's 2 weeks after their big show of the year. That was kind of like the best build they ever did towards a pay per view, and that was kind of almost the most appropriate one because you had to do something crazy to be like, oh well, we have a pay per view 2 weeks after, and we got to build to something great, really. So yeah, they have to really work on building pay per view momentum, but they'll probably never figure that out because they haven't figured that out for a very long time.